Hey guys, OG Albani here, bringing you guys our BBR Season 5 draft analysis. Now, I know BBR Season 4 just ended, but for those of you who don't know, we actually recently just got a new timer kind of introduced back into Scarlet and Violet that lets us play full games again, which is really exciting. Could really lead to like the revitalization of Draft League, and because of that, we had a lot of people that are really excited to jump back into a new season. So we're jumping right in with Season 5, and I'm super excited. If you guys didn't check out our last season or you're new here, thank you for checking out the video. Drop a sub if you're new. Like the video if you enjoy all the good stuff. But we lost in round 1 of last season due to a misclick, which was incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking. So I'm really out for blood this season. I really want to take home this championship in the first Gen 9 league with a proper timer. I think we have a pretty cool squad despite the decks being pretty interesting, and I'm really excited to show you guys off my team and all that fun stuff. So yeah, again, if you like the video, be sure to drop a like on it, and if you're new here, be sure to drop a sub. We make plenty of Pokemon Draft League content. We're on our way to 2,000 subs, and I would really appreciate it if you help me out along that journey. All right, with that being said, some quick little ground rules before we jump into this. We did it with one draft pool, and the reason I mention that now is it's pretty important to like recognize there's not a lot of Pokemon in Paldea decks, and there's not a lot of lower end Pokemon. It feels like the dex is very top heavy, so it's very hard to scrape together rolls in that middle portion of the draft in order to fill the things that we need to fill. So I think actually in general we did one draft pool of 12 coaches this season, and a lot of the teams are really missing and lacking in certain areas, and ours is no exception. Like, we have some things that we're super lacking and some things that we're really great in, and I'll kind of talk about those as we go throughout the video. Another thing is our Terra rolls this season. It's a little bit different. Last season, we had one Terra captain, and you got to declare one typing for it. This season, it's going to be a little bit different. We get one stab typing on our Terra captain and one non-stab typing, but there's also going to be a Terra tax included. So that means that it's either a 20 or 25% increase on the point value of a Pokemon if you choose to make it your Terra captain. So if Dragapult is 18 points and you want to make it your Terra captain, it's actually 22 points. So we'll kind of talk about that as we go, and when we get to our Terra captain and things like that. Alrighty. So first up, with the, I believe, 8th pick of the draft in BBR Season 5, we ended up picking the GOAT, Great Tusk here with pick number 1, which is a pretty interesting pick 1, right? Because in my head, part of me is like, man, this is a great supporting piece. I love having like strong pieces around it. I used an APA Classic and won a championship with it, and right, it's an incredibly strong Pokemon. Really strong Pokemon with what, base 131 attack and Grace 131 defense with 115 HP, so it could be that physical breaker, World Ender with Headlong Rush and Close Combat, Rapid Spin, Knockoff, Ice Spinner, Stone Edge, all this crazy coverage, but also physically defensively. It's a pretty incredible Pokemon. It can body press through things. It can just rock out with Earthquake instead of Headlong Rush to not, drop its defense or anything like that. It functions as a great bulk up sweeper as well, in my opinion, whether it be with like, fat defensive sets with body press, or whether it be with like more offensive sets, and you can almost essentially double dance with like bulking up and rapid spinning. It's a great rocker. We already mentioned it gets knockoff, but it's a pretty huge tool in this generation, in my opinion, where not a lot of things get access to that move, and the value that knockoff offers to so many different teams is immense and incredible, especially with the limited removal. We can knock off boots and put ourselves in a good position. This thing, while it might not be like World Ender on its own, it is such a good supporting and glue piece for any team. It really does remind me of Lando T, and there's a lot of jokes about it being Landorus Therian, but in Gen 9, Great Lando Tusk, or how would you say that? Landorus Tusk, that'd be a good one. Lando T and Tusk, there we go, that's a better one. So big Landorus Tusk here is really going to function as a great glue piece, and I thought about making my Terra captain, and I probably would have done like ground plus steel as the Terra types if I were to make it my Terra captain, but I figured it'd be much better just kind of keeping it stabs, and then we could get our round 2 pick and kind of elevate that Pokemon. And what we ended up doing here is going to be round 2, drafting said Terra captain in Iron Moth. This is a Pokemon I really loved using in my Smog tour, right? Incredible breaker and cleaner. 140 base special attack, 110 speed. It's a little bit faster than Volk, which is, its normal, counterpart, I suppose, and it's a little bit stronger. It doesn't have access to Quiver Dance, but we can agility. We can also rock out with Fiery Dance, which is going to just naturally boost our special attack, provided, the odds are in our favor, I guess. Or we can rock out with Booster Energy sets. So while it can't Quiver and like get super out of hand on its own that way, it can definitely find opportunities to set up and sleep with agility plus booster energy or fiery dance or whatever it may be. And I think with the Terra option on top of it, getting that Terra water is going to be pretty incredible. Water is just a great solid defensive typing on this Pokemon. Really allows it to check and beat a lot of the things that would typically want to come in and check it and beat it. Offensive grounds that want to, potentially check this thing offensively or switch into it defensively really aren't going to appreciate us grabbing that water typing. I'm kind of contemplating going grass, but I like the offensive capabilities of water a little bit better. Gives a lot better neutral matchups defensively, and while it might not be as good as grass is for it defensively, I think offensively Terra Water has been great, and I've seen a lot of people have seen some incredible success with this Pokemon in that regards. I'm hoping that we can come in, click agility, fiery dance through some teams, even rock out with like a spec set with some overheat. We can U-turn around, it gets T-spikes, we can morning sun up for recovery, and fat bulky sets are a very big possibility. And then we have great coverage like Dazzling Gleam, Discharge, Energy Ball, Terra Blast Water, or obviously if we want to just go through and nuke some things with a great offensive fire matchup, because the bulky waters in this meta are really super limited, we can rock out with that Terra Fire Choice Specs Overheat and just like knock something out immediately. And on top of that, Tusk really complements it well in the sense that it can rapid spin away rocks for it. And it's going to be able to switch into and check a lot of the physically offensive threats that are going to take on Moth and things like that. And the threats are the fat passive things that Tusk, doesn't appreciate. Maybe those fat grasses, maybe those fairy types that want to switch in on close combat. Moth is going to come in and it is going to rip through them and absolutely nuke them. So I'm really excited to use this Pokemon. I think it's incredible. And I really do think it was a good use of my Terra points here, opposed to Great Tusk. Maybe I'll end up changing my mind a little bit later on down the road and changing the Terra type or changing the Terra Captain to something else like Tusk. But right now I'm pretty excited to use Moth again and use it to its full capabilities with it as a Terra Captain. Next up, I want to grab another piece for something like my Iron Moth, for things like my Great Tusk, and I actually elected to go Rotom Wash. Good old reliable. Now, Rotom did get nerfed this generation in the sense that it did lose out on both access to Pain Split and Defog and Toxic, which is pretty big for Rotom. It definitely makes it much, much worse. And I do 100% acknowledge that, but it still does what it does. Other than that, insanely well. And that's going to be grabbing momentum, switching into so many different things, a plethora of different things, and baiting very specific switches that I think my team can really take advantage of. The one interaction in particular, now there's a million, but the one interaction in particular is going to be baiting in those fat grasses for Iron Moth to get a free switch in and click a button. And that's kind of the main goal here. It also functions as an incredible ground immunity for Iron Moth. Now, obviously, we can Terra into a water type, but if, say, we want to go Terra Fire one week, or we don't want to Terra yet because of some 50-50s or whatever it may be, or just the ground type is scary and we don't kill it with Terra Blast yet, we have Rotom Wash as a more designated bulky water opposed to just our Terra Captain being able to turn to water type, which is awesome. It spreads plenty of status, whether it be Wisp or T-Wave. We can trick things and, cripple them with a Choice Scarf or a Lagging Tail or plenty of stuff like that. And we can Nasty Plot up. It's a really annoying Pokemon in the sense that it's a Volt Switcher and Momentum Grabber that isn't really stuffed by ground types because they don't want to switch in on that Hydro Pump and get absolutely rocked. And there's no Zygarde, there's no, with its 1,000 arrows, there's no, Mold Breaker, Excadrill, or anything like that to really stop us from coming in and clicking a button, volting out, and getting into either Great Tusk or Iron Moth and doing some damage, which I'm really excited about. Round 4 is coming along, and I'm starting to kind of realize trends in the draft. I'm seeing a lot of fairies go, I'm seeing a lot of steel types go, and I go, oh man, I need to kind of jump on that train a little bit because I really don't want to be left behind and not get these incredibly important roles for my team. So I end up grabbing my fairy next in Screamtail. Now, I was kind of debating between Screamtail and Sylveon at this point in the draft, but the reason I ended up going Screamtail, despite its passivity and its, lack of offensive output, only having 65 in both of its stats, it has a meaty HP stat and defense and special defense stat. This thing is incredibly bulky, and in the sense that when I pass Wishes into my Great Tusk, who has also base, 115 HP, we're actually getting HP back. Whereas if I'm passing Wishes with my Sylveon, I'm not getting as much out of that Wish passing potential. And I really like that out of Screamtail on this team, really. And while it is passive, it has plenty of really awesome options to kind of stop that passivity, whether that be Encore or Perish Song or Thunder Wave or Trick or plenty of different things that we can rock out with. It's another rocker as well, and I want to take a little bit of pressure off of my Great Tusk as a stealth rocker because it's not a Pokemon that always wants to run it. And we can even rock out with some like cheesy booster energy, calm mind, or bulk up sets. There's going to be some teams, especially due to the lack of status and, you know, poison and things like that, where we can come in with Scream Tail and set up and set up and set up. And while we might not be doing the most immediate damage, we are going to outlast things. And with this new timer, we don't got to worry about going to timer anymore. So we can kind of, you know, play a little bit more of a long game. It's also a great wish passer out into something like Rotom, and even, you know, into our, you know, Iron Moth or something like that. It's just a great support piece for the team, and I really do enjoy it. It also gets dual screens with a really fast speed tier too. Like the fact that this thing has 111 base speed is insane. Like they made this thing so passive because everything else it does defensively is so extraordinary. It's really cool. So while it may be a little bit more passive in standard metagames, I think in draft, as long as you're playing with it correctly, it's going to get a lot of mileage for you. So yeah, I'm super excited for Scream Tail here, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to use this season. Next up, kind of just talked about steel types too. I wanted to grab Fortress. The reason I went Fortress for this team was that, again, a Pokemon I'm not super big on, is one, is going to be its rapid spinning capabilities. Again, takes a little bit of pressure off of Great Tusk. 2, it's a great rocker. 3 is the spikes. I really, really want hazards with a team like this. Right now, we have some great momentum with Iron Moth plus Rotom, and I plan on getting a little bit more offense and momentum a little bit later. And I have Pokemon that force very specific switches and can really, really rack up chip damage on things. Like Tusk plus 2 spikes and rocks, or 3 spikes and rocks, is absolutely impossible to switch into. It just doesn't happen, right? So I'm really excited for that regard of it. It gets Volt Switch itself, so it's going to be able to grab momentum. It got access to Body Press this generation, making it a little bit less passive, especially in conjunction with Iron Defense. And it's just an incredibly, it's an incredibly, you know, solid Pokemon for what it does for this specific team. We're going to be able to pass wishes into it with our Scream Tail, as well, to keep it healthy and things like that. It gives us a fairy resistance, not Iron Moth, which it's not the most reliable fairy resistance in the world just because of its poor special defense, but it's solid. And it also gives us a Chien-Pao switch in, which we didn't really have up to this point. And I think it's pretty important to have something to switch into these bigger threats in the metagame, like something like Palafin, which we have Rotom to switch into, and things like that. So I'm definitely excited to use Fortress this season, and I'm thinking it's going to do pretty well for us. Now, round 6 comes along, and I'm kind of trying to fill roles, and I'm looking at teams. I'm like, okay, what do I want to get next? I'm missing out on a, you know, near 100 speed tier. I don't have a dark type. And I look at the board, and a lot of the top end stuff had went at this point, and I saw a Pokemon though, and I was like, wait, why in the world? Round 6 is Hydreigon still sitting there. And I get, again, a lot like Rotom, nerfed this generation. It lost access to Roost, and I believe Defog as well, but that's not that big for me, in my opinion. And losing access to Roost is huge for Hydra, right? And I 100% agree, and I think it's a bit overrated this gen, right? Losing Roost is big, not because it always needed to run it, but it kind of takes away the option of being a more defensive Hydreigon. But offensively, I think Hydreigon is actually better this generation, which might be a hot take, but I want you to look at this metagame, and I want you to tell me the fairy types that exist. I'm waiting. There's like 5. There's really not that many of them, and a lot of them are not very good Pokemon. Plus, those fairy types that come in, 1, if they want to be specially defensive, they're not going to be able to check our Great Tusk as well, right? And not going to be switching to close combats plus headlong rushes. 2, we're baiting in fairy types for our Iron Moth to come in and click a button, which is kind of how I want this team to function. I want to get up hazards, I want to grab momentum, I want to wear things down, and I want to win with Iron Moth. And that's what Hydreigon does for this team, and it does it really well. It also got Rocks this gen, which is a nice little niche buff. Again, say we don't want to bring Fortress, can't fit Rocks and Scream Tail or, you know, Great Tusk or something like that. We got Rocks Hydra. It's a solid nasty plot sweeper. Specs, Life Orb, Scarf especially are going to be great sets for this team. And I really think it's a great facilitator of our offense, as well as a great offensive piece to, you know, really, really break through a lot of these teams that lack a solid fairy. Because let me tell you, there's a lot of them that do not have good, solid answers to Hydreigon. And even if they have a fairy, maybe they don't want to take a +2 Flash Cannon when we Nasty Plot up, or Specs Flash Cannon, or, you know, as we just continuously U-turn forever and ever and get Hazard Chip on things and wear things down to win a little bit later with Great Tusk or Iron Moth. So I'm pretty excited with, you know, the round 6 Hydra pick. I get it's not as good as it was in the past, but I still think it's pretty incredible. Okay. Round 6 comes along, and I'm looking at the board, and again, I'm trying to fill out these roles and find things that I want to fill, and I'm realizing at this point in the draft as well, there are going to be roles that we end up kind of crossing over with typing-wise and weakness-wise and things like that, but in order to kind of, like, achieve the greater good and fit the main niche, purpose that we need, we're going to have to compromise in some areas. And the main thing I really wanted on this team was a good, solid 115 plus speed tier. Now, I have Screamtail, who's decently fast at 111, but let's be honest, I'm probably not running super, super fast Screamtail a lot of weeks. And even then, people aren't super going to respect that speed tier being how passive it can be. So I actually ended up grafting a Pokemon where I already have one of its typings on the team already, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal. And I think it's a solid pick, and that's going to be Talonflame. Talonflame is another fire type, obviously, right? On top of Iron Moth. But one, Iron Moth is going to be tearing a lot, right? And two, it's not going to be, as defensive as something like Talonflame is probably going to be, or as much of a pivot as something like Talonflame is going to be on a team like this. Whereas we're either going to be Terra Watering, we're going to be coming in to win the game, or click a button. Talonflame offers a lot of solid resistances. It gives me another Fairy Resist outside of the Iron Moth and the Fortress, who's kind of a mediocre one. It gives me priority and Brave Bird with Gale Wings, which priority is really important in this metagame, in my opinion. Like, it is really, really tough to revenge a lot of these scary offensive booster energy speed boosting Pokemon, and that strong priority Brave Bird is going to be a really clutch tool and aspect for this team. But it also gives me Defog, more U-turn and momentum, and it gives me that solid speed tier, which is the main thing I wanted. I actually think Talonflame was like so valuable to this team and is going to be such a valuable member throughout the season. It just seems a little bit weird, obviously, having it plus Moth, but I really do think it's great. And there's going to be a couple picks on this team where you're doubling up on typings, and it's kind of weird. But again, not the biggest deal in the world, in my opinion. I really do think it's a solid pickup. Speaking of which, round 8, it's another double up typing. And fun fact, in the actual draft itself, I did not draft this Pokemon at this point. I think at pick 8, I drafted Amoonguss, and I drafted Amoonguss and Lucario, and I ended up trading Lucario for my round 9 pick, which we'll get to. But because of that, the Pokemon I got in round 9 kind of defeated the purpose of the Amoonguss I got in round 8. So I dropped Amoonguss, and the only Pokemon that kind of gave me similar value at that tier, and again, we had a lot of points in this draft, so I really don't think it's too big of a deal that I end up getting this, even though it doesn't like explicitly fit, is going to be Gothitelle. Now, it's kind of an enigma, right? I see Gothitelle as its own separate Pokemon in the sense that it's not here to be a bulky psychic or set up WinCon or whatever. It's here to be Gothitelle. It's here to force ridiculous amount of prep, force shed shells and momentum and taunts and things like that on Pokemon that don't want to run them, and get value out of trapping these Pokemon and things like that. So let's say something is, super annoying for my Great Tusk. Say there's a Slowbro on the other team and I just can't kill it like whatsoever. I can either use my Gothitelle to trap that Slowbro, or I can force a Shed Shell on it to where it's not Rocky Helmet, or if I knock it off with my Great Tusk, then it's dropped by Gothitelle anyways. And the same thing with Iron Moth and Hydreigon and all these Pokemon. I'm going to be forcing so many Shed Shells, and it's not that like Goth has to come in and set up a win. I can rock out with Scarf sets and Trick sets and just set up sets that just beat that one specific Pokemon, or weird niche options like that. I think Goth is pretty solid on this team in the sense that it's going to force a ridiculous amount of prep. I had the extra points left over, and I figured why not? Again, I understand it doesn't specifically trap everything that my team hates, and I don't know if it's a Pokemon that's going to come to even half of our games, which is pretty crazy for a Pokemon at its price point, but it is so incredibly valuable in the prep that it forces, and the items that it's going to force, and the punishing of other teams if they don't bring Shed Shells on their Pokemon. So I'm really excited for Goth this season. I've used it before in the past to pretty, solid success. And I'm thinking it's going to help out things like Iron Moth, Great Tusk, and Hydreigon pretty well. Next up was that round 9 trade. We grabbed Breloom. Now, again, we are rocking out with double fighting right here, which seems interesting, but I wanted some more priority. I wanted a ground resist, and this is what Breloom's going to do. It also offers me a great disruptor in offering Spore and things like that. It really breaks through bulky waters, taking a lot of pressure off Rotom, because at this point, we really only had Rotom to like specifically break through fat, annoying waters. Breloom's going to do that this season for us. It's a Pokemon I've used in the past, and I've really, really loved it. Whether it be with Life Orb sets, Band sets, Swords Dance sets, or even like defensive Toxic Orb sets. It's an Edge Quick Resist, which I didn't have on my team up to this point. And the Pokemon that can switch into those moves get worn down really fast, so Breloom's going to be another great option for that. It got access to Close Combat and Bulldoze this generation, which is a really clutch tool as well. And I'm really excited to use this Pokemon. I've used it before. Again, we're kind of doing that thing where we're compromising and, doubling up on certain roles to get things that we need. But I really like Breloom on this team, and something like Great Tusk plus Breloom, they're going to really overwhelm the checks that they have together. And really, they don't overlap as much as you'd think when it comes to things that are going to be switching into, you know, Great Tusk and Breloom at the same time. Like a lot of flying types that think they're going to check Great Tusk are just going to get blown ass backwards by an Ice Spinner or a Stone Edge or something like that. Or Breloom can force chip on those checks that check both of these Pokemon, and the other one can come in and thrive and do really well. So I'm really excited for both of these Pokemon. I think they're going to do really, really well on this team. And I think the double fighting core is going to work out well. Then we got the Big Bear, Big Ursaring. At this point in the draft, there was no normal types that I wanted. I really wanted Dunsparce, but J-Bear took it from me a little bit too early, and we probably wouldn't have ended up getting either Goth or Breloom. One of the two probably would have had to been something else, just because of the points. But I wanted a solid Ghost immunity, because right now, my Ghost Resist is Hydreigon, who's not a bad Ghost Resist, especially in Generation 8 and prior, when it had access to Roost, but being that it doesn't have any reliable recovery now, I wanted something that could, you know, more lively switch in on those things. Now, Ursaring doesn't have reliable recovery, but we can rock out with Eviolite, and we can Rest Hog, or if there's a matchup where our opponent has a slower team, a fatter team, we can rock out with Guts, Facade, you know, Flame Orb sets, and rip through teams. Big Bear can demolish some squads. It has great coverage. It's incredibly strong, and a really solid Pokemon overall. For its price point, at the very least. Kurt really loved it in Smog Tour. I know he used it to pretty solid effect. And I remember in Clash of Kings, which is the tournament I captained in last gen, one of our low tier teams had Ursaring, and it consistently put in work. So I think in this limited decks, when there's not as many ghosts as, like, you know, other generations where there's a more full dex or like a Nat Dex League or something like that, I think it's going to do its job well, and it at least gives me that immunity to where Spec Shadow Ball isn't going to rip through me guaranteed. So I think that's nice. And lastly, we had like 2 points left over at this point. I figured why not force a little bit of prep. There's no good Pokemon in this tier, but I might as well force a wee bit of prep and get to rock out with the double Bug Core. We got Spidops. He is here as an additional hazard setter, and mostly sticky webs. Now we have other spikers, in particular the Fortress. This does give us another spiker and T-Spiker. It gives us priority in first impression, I suppose. It's not a strong Pokemon. If you look at its move pool, it's not bad, right? It has great move pool. Between all of its hazards and its offensive pool and, you know, things like that. Stakeout is a really strong ability. We force a switch and we do a lot more damage to something on the switch in. It's just the stats. Our highest stats are defense stat at 92. It's not a very, you know, strong nor bulky Pokemon, but it has the tools to do decently well. It can do some cool things like a Memento even. It gets U-turn as well, you know, grab a little bit of momentum, Sticky Web. Realistically, Spidops isn't going to come a lot, but it might force a little bit of prep, and there might be that matchup where I'm like, my opponent has no removal. I'm setting up webs, and I have a Choice Band Great Tusk, I got a Choice Specs Iron Moth, I got a Specs Hydra, you know, obviously not these exact things, but I'm coming HO offense, you can't remove my webs, and I'm going to knock out every Pokemon in your team. So yeah, that's going to be the team. Last screen is going to sit up here with Spidops, but let me know what you guys think. Now, there are obviously some big holes on my team, a lot of overlapping, you know, weaknesses and things like that, but I think overall, offensively, our team is pretty incredible. I think we have a solid defensive backbone, and I'm really excited to rock out this season and hopefully grab a dub. I think we play Nexus Week 1, which will be really cool. I'm super excited for that one, and I'm super excited to, you know, grind the season out. If you guys want to help out with the season, there's a link down in the description below for my Discord server. In that Discord server, which you can also just join a hangout, of course, there's also going to be the option to join my front office and help me run mocks mostly this season, and you know, help out in the building process and things like that. I appreciate it if you do want to help. Obviously, no one's obligated though. And yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, drop a like if you enjoyed, sub if you're new. See you guys in the next one. Later.